Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on this short week where we've got Thanksgiving is just in 2 days. Hard to believe that we're almost here at the end of the year already, and Thanksgiving's already here. I feel like this year just flew by. Of course, that's probably a little cliche. Everybody says that right at this point in the year, but anyways, it is what it is, I suppose. So, really excited to have this conversation today as we're getting ready for Thanksgiving, and particularly in this case because it's been kind of a wild year, right? And we're just at a stage in time where there are a lot of people that are running family-owned businesses that you'll probably be getting together with over the next couple of days, or certainly over this long weekend. And these are people that you also maybe work with, right, in these family-owned businesses. And how do you what are all those dynamics there? There's a lot of emotion, there's finances, there's just the holidays in general. I mean, there's just all the things seem to converge at this time of year in the last 6 or so weeks before we turn the page on to a new calendar year. So anyways, really excited to have Savannah Suttle with me. She's got a background in sales, in business, in family counseling, and so she's kind of touched on all these different areas and things over the course of her career. And so I'm really excited to have her be on today and to talk about this because it is such an important thing. And I think the other thing too is like everybody's always expecting me to come on and figure out how we talk about benefits and all these kinds of things. But I think at this point in fourth quarter, everybody, including myself, is fed up and tired about talking about healthcare and benefits and all those things. So very excited to have this change of pace and introduce you all to Savannah. Savannah, why don't you take a few minutes and just kind of introduce yourself, tell us about your background, and then just kind of kick off the conversation for us.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for having me. Everybody, I'm Savannah Suttle. I'm so excited to be with you. I'm the founder and CEO of Schema. We do family business coaching for family businesses when family dynamics are impacting business operations in a way that you would like to change. So my formal training and background is in marriage and family therapy. I practiced as a therapist for quite a while, for about 10 years. And we have first a behavior therapist and then as a marriage and family therapist. But I also have I love entrepreneurship and I love everything that comes along with that. So there's been a kind of circuitous pathway in blending those two things. One of the things that I started realizing was that when families with family businesses would come to work on things in session, right, that frequently, if they did not rectify the operating models that were at the family business, then the things that they would work on in my session would not necessarily translate back to the family business because they would have solidified some of their dysfunction into their operating procedures. That's not always an intuitive thing to tease out. So back then, as a therapist, there are certain things that you can't do in terms of getting involved in people's business in that way, and that's fine. There's a great reason for that. So, but what I realized is that in trying to find business consultants who could come in and help them work through the operating procedures, the business consultants didn't necessarily want to touch the family dynamics with a 10-foot pole. So, to that end, in 2016, I started Schema, where I have a different modality and framework for working with family-owned and operated businesses and helping them understand kind of the structural implications for how their family dynamics play out in business, how business dynamics will impact their family structure and function, and how you can actually resolve those things to work together more effectively with more love, compassion, camaraderie, and usually a lot more profit. So super fun. Chris, thank you so much for having me, and I'm so glad to be with all of you for the holidays and talking about all the fun stuff that typically comes up around the dinner table.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, excellent. Well, and so walk us through, I guess, what that looks like, initially, and maybe you can share a few examples or some war stories, if you will, about, maybe where, a lot of times I'm just speaking from my own personal experience, right, where it's like you've got the oldest generation that kind of started everything, right, and that was entrepreneurial, that took that risk, that decided that they were going to, launch this business and that type of thing. And then what invariably comes along after that is then the next generation, when they reach an age, and again, this is also assuming that entrepreneur was successful, that they did, what they set out to do. They've continued to grow and expand and continued their mission for their business. And then you've got, the kids, so to speak, right? That then at a certain point, they're no longer kids, right? They've grown up. They've kind of done all the things. They have started their own careers. And many times, sometimes that includes going into the family business. And so then you've got this dynamic of like, well, mom and dad started this thing way back in the day. They built it to what it is today. And then I'm trying to come in and, having that mom and dad relationship with the owners of the company, right? But then also trying to put your own stamp on things. Because at that point, look, if you're, an entrepreneur or a couple that's started a business or what have you, you're going to raise kids that are going to be very spirited, independent. They're going to be, they're going to want to put their own mark on things. Well, really, anybody who raises kids, that's part of it, right? Is you want your kids to flee the nest, and you want them to, kind of learn things, and then in this case, bring some of that experience and bring some of that education that they've earned along the way into the business. And so sometimes that does create some issues where it's like, hey, look, this is the same kid who I changed their diapers, I gave them bottles, I picked up their toys, I did their laundry, right? And now they're telling me how to run my business that I started before they were born. Well, I'm not going to stand for that. So anyways, maybe we can just start there, as it relates to family-owned business dynamic.
Yeah. So one of the things, especially around the holidays, especially when in family businesses, there tends to be a bleed over in the conversation, right? It's not just about family and it's not just about business. It's end of year, it's the stress, it's everything. And so the business becomes kind of the canvas upon which you paint all of your family stuff. Right? It is the power struggles. It is the, oh my gosh, I've spent too much time with you. Oh my gosh, why haven't you moved home yet to help me? But also like, if you move home, then I'm going to sit here and nitpick and micromanage you, to your point of, I have done this for forever. It is the canvas upon which you paint a lot of your unresolved things and maybe the learning curves where certain individuals may not be as emotionally intelligent as you are. And you have to sit there and listen to them like externally process and work this stuff out in front of you. And you're like, really? How old are you? Are you in your 60s? Because did we not learn this when we were 13? Okay. No, missed that lesson. Still processing. At 60? Got it. Okay. Whew. So it's the whole shebang. And so one of the things in as you approach the holiday season, and if this is your family, right? Or if you even just work in a family business and you're like, all right, here we go again with a holiday party. Just understand a few things. There's the family itself and how they function. There's how those dynamics will map onto the business systems and structures. And then there are generational dynamics, and then there are personality dynamics. Right? And so sometimes a lot of those things just tend to mush together, like combining a lot of different colors of Play-Doh, and then it's like, how do you even separate this anymore? If you can start by having compassion and patience, right, and a good attitude of just like, all right, this is going to be what it is, and I'm going to approach this with a spirit of good humor, right? And try to tease, just try to sit there. And one, attitude is contagious. So if you can approach the holiday season with a good attitude, just watch how it will impact your family system. If you can approach things with a spirit of comedy instead of a spirit of criticism, you will enjoy these meals so much more. Okay? I promise. So just have this framework of, okay, what exactly how can I start to sort through, man, is this a personality thing or is this generational? Is this, I don't know, man, these siblings are going at it again. This is the same song, same verse. Like, what's unresolved there that they feel like that? Or is this just do they just love this? Like, is this their favorite skit? Like, nitpicking at each other and being like, and the same old jokes. Sometimes people love the repetition. So, like, you brought up, Chris, a point about the founding generations and the younger generations, and we're talking about navigating change in business transitions. So right now we're seeing the greatest generational transfer of wealth, right? in human history. And we're seeing a lot of boomers who are retiring, and they are now having to figure out how do they pass on their business to either a family member, to a non-family member. Do they sell it? Do they close it? Do they turn it into an ESOP? Do they just go down with the ship without a plan? And I'm starting to see a lot of millennials and Gen X who are now trying to figure out, like, hey, we should have been having this conversation with mom and dad about 10 years ago, and it still hasn't been happening. And part of that's because about 10 years ago, these kids were in their 20s, maybe early 40s, and mom and dad have that exact same approach of, I've got it, I'm still mom, and I'm still in my prime, I'm going to blow, and I don't have any intention of retiring anytime soon. That's tomorrow's problem, and you're not ready for this business anyway, so we'll deal with it later. Well, now later is here. And so a lot of these conversations that should have been had are now coming home to roost, where it's like, hey, we're actually behind the times, where mom and dad are now in their 70s, and they're approaching their 70s, or maybe in some cases they're in their 80s, and maybe they're not the spring chickens that they think they are, and maybe they're not making great decisions about business, or they're just taking the keys away from mom and dad. But sometimes that also looks like taking away some of the business decisions. What do you do when there's a business? What do you do when they are the owner and they start to have cognitive decline, or they aren't keeping up with the times, right? And they can't keep staff and people and systems, they can't modernize appropriately. I'm seeing a lot of that. What tends to happen, so one is, usually if you are, I'm going to speak to the kids for a second. If you are seeing this with your parents, one, have some compassion and grace. Two, I understand that it is probably terrifying. Because what you're looking at is, oh my gosh, I am probably going to inherit a ginormous mess. And so what I see more often than not, even if it's not just the founding generations, but usually it's just the older generations, right, who they are used to operating in a relationship capacity. Their process is, I just told Carol what needed to be done, and then Carol handled it. That was the process. That has been the process. As a younger generation, you know that there are more steps. Carol's probably got to do this and that, and because what happens when Carol retires? What do we do now? How do we train? Where do you put the things? And so you understand what that process is. The older generation is like, people figure it out. And that is sometimes true. And yet now in modern society, with the amount of technology, the amount of turnover, the amount of systematizing, the amount of scale that is required to keep up, we all know that there are more steps in the process that we need to actually map out. If your parents don't get that, it's not because they're stupid. It's because they weren't raised that way, right? Technology did not have the same impact on the way their brains have developed in the same way that yours did. So parents, you need to know that there are skills that your kids have, and I know you know this, but truly, there are skills that your kids have, hope they have, that are different than yours, and that are definitely necessary for adapting and thriving in today's society. We are at a weird point in history with tech, right? With the way that things are moving so quickly, and the way that you have to keep up. It's no longer going to the library to hunt for your information. It's just bombarded at you all the time. We have become more like whales filtering plankton. We're like having to just sort through the information and figure out what's nutritious and where we want to put it and how do we find this again in the future. We've gone from paper-based, where you have a physical object that you can move stuff around, and you're like, oh yeah, I have to do something with this. I need to file it. I need to give it to somebody. I need to throw it away. There's a physical object. To now we have 8 million tabs open. And if you don't see it, then you can just click out and it disappears forever, right? That actually accesses a different part of your working memory. So parents, your kids have different, they're starting to process information, and they're starting to process organization and executive function, which is like decision making and stuff, differently than you do. They also process relationships differently than you do. And I know you know this intuitively. And keep that in mind as you start to think about how you are transitioning your business, right? You might see things where like, well, I don't want to pass on my business to my kids, or they're not prepared because they don't really understand the importance of salesmanship. They don't really understand the importance of going out and shaking hands with customers and doing the thing, whatever. Okay, teach them. Teach them. Show them. Show them how you were raised and why it's important. And I know you're like, oh my gosh, Savannah, like I was not born yesterday. I have tried. What do you think I've been doing my whole life? If you can't do that, pull in somebody who's cool and get them to tell them. It's just like, this is half my job, I swear. Is like, I can't tell my family members won't listen to me, so I'm going to pull in somebody else who can tell them the thing, and then maybe they'll hear it. It's just like when they're kids, and you have to go find the cool teenager down the street to tell them what's up, right? Cool teenager, not a teenager, but same thing. Sorry, I'm like monologuing, but
you're doing great.
Yeah. So this is where like be strategic. Be strategic. What y'all are trying to communicate, especially in transition, is one, transition has to happen. Change is good. Let's get along and figure it out together. If we can't figure it out together, pull somebody else in and get some help. No shame in asking for help. We're just doing it differently, doing it a little bit more strategically, right? And just changing the structure. It's kind of like, I use a lot of football analogies. It's like when you looking at relationship structure is a lot like a football play. If you change the positions of the players on the field, you're going to change the dynamic of how that play unfolds. In the same way with your family, if you can change the structure, or if you can rent a big sister, and have somebody in the mix, it's like when you pull in your grandparent because that they're going to be a good mediator, or because they're going to diffuse the situation. When you do that, you are intuitively changing the structure of a relationship dynamic. Don't be afraid to try that when you are talking about business transition and change. Because ultimately what you're looking at is, one, do we have a plan? If not, how do we co-create one together? Because mom and dad, you are two things. If you have always been the person who is calling the shots, you have likely created an underdeveloped sense of ownership in your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to get them to take on that sense of ownership that's going to be required to be a solid, awesome business owner is to be responsible for decisions, to be accountable, to see cause and effect, to have actions and consequences, and for them to actually be, responsible for their own decisions.
Right. Well, and have some of that ownership, like you were just saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
To take initiative, to see that when you don't take initiative, things don't get done, and that's on you, right? So if mom and dad, if you are the ones who are always calling the shots, and you're now looking at your business, and you're like, well, now I'm going to have to carve the exit plan, and and you expect to just tell your kids how it's going to go, one, that is likely short-sighted. They need to be participating in the process. They need to be co-designing it and building it with you, because this is their future that they're stepping into. Again, I know it's like, duh, Savannah, but people forget this, right? And it's because you get stuck in this mode. For their whole lives, you've been like, put on your clothes, brush your teeth, pick up your room, do the things, get in the car, where are your shoes? All that, and you just get stuck in this mode of like instruction. And instead of kind of pulling that out of them, and asking them, hey, what is it that you want? And, people get stuck in that mode. Even in, I was just talking with a therapist friend of mine that, the joke is you've got about 48 hours when you go home before every single person reverts to about age 11. And it's so true. And you as mom and dad will relate to them as like age 11, like, oh my gosh, can you please just like, if you feel that way in your business, right? Or if you have, let's say that you've got kids who are not participating in the business, and they come home and now you're like, hey, I'm getting older and I'd like to talk about what the plan is for retirement, or are you going to take this on, or do I need to sell it, or what do we want to do? If when those discussions start happening, you feel yourself reverting back to those older patterns, right? Again, pull somebody else in and or try to flip the script and say, okay, I'm mom and dad, we're going to wear the employee hats. Kid, you're wearing the owner hat. Let's role play. These are the things. What do you want to do? And don't make it a test about like whether or not they're competent. This is their first time they're, doing the thing. They're not going to be a rock star, and they're not going to do it like you did it. But this is about loving them and inspiring personal growth and character building and helping them figure it out, right? They have to figure it out for themselves, just like you had to figure it out for yourself. Nobody had to come and teach you. You had to do it the hard way. They're going to have to do it the hard way. And that's okay. That's okay. Do hard things. Life's full of hard things. That's where the good stuff is. Don't deprive your kids of hardship. Don't deprive them of struggle. They need that. They need that.
That's so good. Yeah, that really is so good. I love all your little analogies, the Play-Doh, the whales, all that stuff. Those were great. Those were gems. So yeah, and so much of what you were talking about, I've seen with my own clients, with my own friends that have taken over their parents' businesses and things like that. I've seen a lot of the dynamics, and I'm sure all of the listeners have as well too. Just about, and I think, so I think part of what happens too is, kind of like what you were just talking about, is it's like I want to protect them from the bad things, right? Because my kids would have no idea, but I had some early days where we struggled quite a bit, and it was like, all right, how are we going to pay the bills this month, right? Type of thing. And they probably even to this day have no idea about that, right? And so if you're that older generation that maybe protected your kids from the downturns or the bad times in your business, and you want to kind of shield them from that, or you just want to shield them in general. I think sometimes too, I think with that older generation, what I've noticed is there's kind of this avoidance where it's like, hey, look, I've been doing this for so long. I don't want to change anything. I don't want to confront my own mortality. I don't want to have to think about that, right? So if
or I'm just tired,
or that too. Just, I'm too tired to quit. I'm too tired to I like this little routine I'm in, those kinds of things. That may be part of it. So talk a little bit from that younger generation, maybe if you're that younger generation who really wants to get in and do this, right? Because I've seen that plenty as well too, where it's like, all right, mom, all right, dad, like, I really want to get after this. I want to do it, but you're trying to kind of keep me at arm's length here. Maybe talk about it from that perspective. What do you do if you're that younger generation trying to break through to your folks and get them to, kind of get with the times, I guess?
I love that question. I see that a lot. Actually, most of the time I am brought in by one of, it's usually about 50-50. Either it's professionals who can't do their jobs because the family dynamics are getting in the way, or it's the kids who are like, hey, I can't get my folks to have these discussions with me, and I don't want to inherit a mess, or I want to flex my muscles. I'm in my 30s. I feel like I've got stuff to offer. I went and left and went to corporate and, did all these cool things, and I want to bring that knowledge back home, and apply it at our home base. And parents are like, I don't know, we'll try. Well, it doesn't really work that way here, or it won't work that way here. And there's a lot of naysaying, right? Or can be. Sometimes, so let me paint a few pictures. Sometimes there's a lot of naysaying of, I just don't want to change, or I don't think it's going to work, or man, I've seen other people come in and try stuff and it's just failed, or I already did that when I was in my 40s and it just bombed, and I don't want to do that again because it was really unfun then, and I don't have any intention of repeating that. But Junior don't necessarily know this, right? Parents, they have to try. They have to figure it out. They have to. And I know you're like, but I don't want Savannah, but like, this is my nest egg. It is. So do it with them, right? Not condescendingly, do it with them. Kids, if your parents are kind of stuck in denial or whatever, here's how you can start facilitating that discussion. Start by creating a roadmap, right? And saying, okay, the next 10 years of my life, let's say that you're 35 and you have 3 kids, right? And let's say that they're in elementary school right now and you got a newborn. You're looking at the next 10 years. Where are they going to be in high school? If your parents are going to expect you to pick up and move at that time to come take over the business, and you're looking at a career change while your kids are in high school, that's probably, and let's say you're going to have to move cross country or whatever, like, for you to be able to just spell that out and say, hey, I'm trying to be a responsible parent. I'm trying to plan ahead. I know that there are things that we can't account for, but here are my concerns. I would like to have a plan with you. I would like to co-design it. Whatever you choose is fine. And yet I can't live my life like this. And I wouldn't want this for my kids. And I don't want it for myself. So I am trying to show agency and ownership. I also don't want you to feel like you're being pushed out of the nest. So what I want to do is do this together. I want to work on this project with you together. Here's what I need. I need answers to this, and this. What do you want to do with the business? What is important to you in your legacy? What do you need financially out of this business in order to feel safe and secure as you are aging? What are your plans for aging? Would you like to age in place? Are you intending to move to Palm Springs? What do you want to do? What about assisted living? Do we have enough? Do you have insurance? Do you have an estate plan? Oh, you do have an estate plan? Great. Here, they just recently did a study that out of 100 people interviewed who had an estate plan, 99 people did, and 97 of them had not shared it with anybody. Okay, so there's this expectation that I'm going to write a will or have an estate plan, and then y'all just figure it out after I die. Y'all, please. I know that there's probably some conflict avoidance in there, but do yourself a favor. Do your kids a favor. Do everybody a favor. Start talking about this stuff now, right? And if you're like, oh my gosh, it's going to cause all this conflict, well, probably it needs to be had while you're there.
Right.
Right. I mean, get a therapist. Grow up, like it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
But I mean, I say that flippantly, and for some people it's more than that. So, but yeah, so look at if you're a kid and you're trying to work with your folks on this, have some actual concrete questions that they can either answer or they can say, I don't know, right? And you say, okay, let's put deadlines on figuring them out together. Schedule lunches with your folks. Schedule Zoom calls and say, okay, we're going to have dedicated time. Make them do the work. Make them communicate with you. Mm-hmm. And if you find that they are resistant, don't be afraid. Again, you can pull somebody like me in. You can pull in their financial advisor, the attorney, somebody. Just like the parents sometimes go get that cool teenager, you go get their friends. Okay, go get their friends to go tell them, hey, Junior came over and was asking me these questions about your stuff. Are you not talking to him about this? Get their friends to tell them what's up, okay? So that they don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's almost, it's kind of like what we were just talking about from the older generation, but in reverse, right? Because as the parent, you're not going to listen to your kids. You know better than them. You raise them. You change their diapers and all these kinds of things. So, but yes, if you can involve the people that are already advising them, the CPA that's already working in the business, and there's somewhat of a business dynamic there. And then I think the other thing that you can do there too, and this is where, working with somebody like you would be great for these kinds of situations. But, it's like they can also that Savannah, that CPA, that financial advisor, they can say things like, hey, here's what I've seen when this goes poorly. Here's what I've seen when this goes well. And by the way, if somebody's done an estate plan, right, they've talked probably with their CPA. They've certainly met with an attorney and helped kind of sketch out some legal documents or actually put those together. And they've probably also worked with a financial advisor about, all right, we've got this pile of money. How does this get distributed to, 2, 3, 4 kids, whatever it is, when we're gone? How do these assets get distributed? So if you've gone through the time to do all that and you spent the money with these people to do that, then yeah, let's kind of key somebody else in that needs to be, part of this. And so, I know plenty of people. In fact, I know my own parents have done this, right? When they leave for like a big trip, they're going to be gone or whatever. It's like, hey, here's the estate plan. Here, you're the executor. Kind of cluing everybody in on, or at least
Yes.
cluing like the key person in on, here's what's going to happen if we don't make it back from this trip, right?
Yes.
And obviously they usually, or in my case, my parents have always made it back from these trips, but at some point they might not, right? These,
Yes.
things happen, but it's always kind of events like that kind of help spur this along, where it's like, all right, so if I can have any kind of advice there, it's like lean into that, right? Let's lean
Yes.
into that. And yeah, it might be a little bit uncomfortable, and dad may not want to talk about it, but like, let's kind of get through that initial, kind of him putting up his walls. Let's break the ice a little bit, and then start to get him to soften up.
Yes.
You know.
Absolutely. No, I love that, because especially with older generations, if they are not used to getting into the same emotional conversation. So, like Gen X and younger tend to have a much more expansive emotional vocabulary, right? We've
Mhm.
grown up with it in pop culture, sometimes in formal education, et cetera, of just like understanding, so a lot of psychobabble, so to speak. But older generations, even though they may be aware of that, they are not necessarily always able to implement it in the same way in real time. So sometimes that can be overwhelming. They also tend to do a lot of internal processing first, right, before they speak. So if you start to notice that by dumping all these questions, they start to get overwhelmed, I love that. Yeah, just a little bit at a time. Start to soften it up. Create a routine. Hey, an end of year business check-in. I'm going to be doing another webinar on one of those. How to do an end of year business check-in with your family, right? To just do the same thing. Like, hey, what's changed this year? We leased this property and then we sold this one, and now we're gonna planning to do new construction on this other thing. Just to make sure that everybody's on the same page about where things are in progress, so that if something does happen, everybody's pretty much aware of where things have kind of landed, right?
Right.
I often have like a family business pop quiz, right? That you can pass to your family members and be like, hey, do you know the name and number of our accountant in case something happens? No? Okay, fill this out, because that's the kind of stuff that it can change, right? And you want to make sure that everybody knows the drill, especially for people who are operating in the company. They tend to have all this, it's just in second nature. Of course you're going to call Jim. Well, do your kids know Jim? Do they know how to get in touch with Jim? Do they know where to find stuff on your desk in order to find out where Jim is? Do they have access to your email? Do they have multi-factor authentication? Do they know to keep paying your cell phone bill? Like things like this that are going to really help them in the event that something happens. So, yeah, and if you all want, send me. I'll happily post my family business pop quiz after this, and use it to spur these conversations at the dinner table.
Yeah, well, I think what we ought to do, I didn't even realize you had something like that. I think that'll be part of the follow-up that goes out. I always like to send out, as the audience knows, some kind of PDF, some kind of, something else to kind of, keep the webinar still relevant, at least in their minds, and have something after action. So we'll be sure to send that out. That's really clever, and I think probably useful, even if it's somebody that doesn't own a business, right? It's just like, I mean, in this day and age, everything's kind of two-factor authentication. You got all these kind of things to worry about, and the last thing you'd want is like, oh, Dad has all this Bitcoin. Where did this come from? And then you can't access it, right? Like,
and domains. I mean, the thing is like, how many people have like these amazing, super cool domains from the that they bought during the .com boom, that now they still own. And they've kept paying hosting fees, and now it's super lucrative, right? And they don't even know, or the kids don't know. They're like, oh, wait, what? We could sell, I don't know, dogs.com for $1 million or more, probably more. But you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. So there's this whole set of digital assets that people don't even register, things that they actually have, and digital responsibilities. So in terms of like your Facebook profile and your other, legacy contacts and things like that, that's fairly new. So, and not always included in your estate plan, right? So things to think about.
Right. When you're typically just kind of thinking about those hard assets and the accounts and the, this so on and so forth. So yeah, that's interesting. There was something else you said just a moment ago that I wanted to key back in on, but it's escaped me. Anyways, well, I know where I was going to go with it. So, you know, the and it was kind of along the lines of what we were just talking about. So, again, it's involving those other people and things like that. But I think the other thing that where I really wanted to go with that is, look, we're in the last, call it 5 or 6 weeks of the year, right? So maybe this is something for the roadmap of 2025. My thought is I always like to kind of reverse engineer things, right? And that part of
Yes.
that I think is just kind of like, in some ways that's just kind of how I think. But, if I'm looking at like a sales process, for example, it's like, all right, well, this is a group that renews June 1st, so let's reverse engineer and figure out what needs to take place between now and then to get them to a place. So you can kind of do that where it's like I think that's an easier thing to do. It's like not so, and this kind of planning doesn't take place, in one session. This
Right.
is something that stretches out over months or potentially over years, hopefully. But, if you're reverse engineering, it's like maybe that's the way to approach it is like mom and dad, like, when do you want to be done? Right?
Yeah.
Let's just start there and then we can kind of work backwards and have those monthly or bi-weekly or weekly get-togethers, lunches or whatever. And then you start to bring in some of those other advisors to those lunches. It's like, all right, so we'll just kind of
Yes.
these first few, this is just me and mom and dad or whatever the dynamic is there too. But you just have those few people, and then the next one maybe then you bring in the CPA, and then you bring in the financial advisor, and you kind of do this, and you're kind of that drip on the water that's dripping on the rock that eventually drills a hole through it. Is you're doing that slowly, but as you start to involve all these other people and their opinions and their input and their ideas, and then you maybe bring in another family that that has a business, right, that has done this transition already, and so then they can hear from one of their peers how this was the best thing that they did, right, was to plan this out in advance and be very thoughtful about the approach and those types of things. But yeah, if you can do that, if you can kind of see that, okay, so mom and dad, you want to be done by this time next year, we've got some work to do. Or you want to be done in 5 years, okay, well, we should start doing this now, right? Like we shouldn't put this off until next year because the next year's going to come and you're going to want to put it off again. And it's just human nature. So let's start to do this slowly, whatever that timeline is. But if you can kind of get somewhat of a timeline, an idea at least, a little bit of a framework, and then work backwards from there to figure out what needs to take place and all the players that need to be involved and those types of things, right? And then also start to bring in your own team, right? Because their CPA may be going through the same thing. Their CPA may be a peer that is also looking at retiring, and then so do you bring in one of his younger partners or her younger partners or do you have a different firm that you want to go with? You've got somebody else that you want involved. So it's definitely a team sport to, take your football analogy, but certainly is a team sport. Although, again, for entrepreneurs, it feels like you're there on your own, and you have been for so long. So yeah,
No,
anyways.
100%. And one of the things that I'd like to point out, so what you're talking about is I love you bringing up the peers potentially retiring. So there's this team of the CPAs, your attorney, et cetera. How many people have been entrepreneurs? They are now in their 70s. They've got, their team's been with them for the last 25, 30 years. I mean, they've established solid rapport, but now those people are also looking at retirement, right? Your ability to have those consistent meetings with your kids, or the ones who are interested in participating, right? And not just about succession planning, but just regular orders of business. Of, hey, this is what's happening. This is the history behind this. This is the context in which these decisions were made. These are the ones that were good decisions, and these are the ones that sucked. And like, here's what we're having to do about it. And I'm sorry you're going to end up having to clean this up 10 years from now, or whatever. But just to be able to pull that in and then get perspective from your kids, and maybe they know somebody, right? Maybe their network is different or bigger than yours, or maybe they need to start developing that. Maybe they need to develop eyes to see what is a good attorney and what is not, So, and you're coaching them on that process is going to be really constructive for them long term.
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing you brought up in the last quarter of an hour here is siblings that might not be interested in being in the business. So let's talk about, we've talked, mostly this has so far been about mom and dad and then the kids, let's talk about kind of the siblings, or if you're in a third generation business, you're maybe talking about cousins and
Yes. And
how.
in-laws.
And well, that's right too. Yes, right. Yes, you've got a spouse that then gets involved in stuff and what have you. So yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit too. How those dynamics of kind of the sibling rivalry, or one cousin, cousins that grew up together are now potentially running a business together, and maybe some that are not involved, but they also have some kind of stake in it, right?
Mhm.
What does that look like, or maybe share a few examples from what that might look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where we kind of go back to that Play-Doh analogy, right?
Yep.
There are expectations. There are people, so each person is going to come with their own set of expectations of what your role and responsibility is, what everybody else's role and responsibility is. Like, okay, well, and you see this obviously like with kids of like, oh, well, dads are supposed to do this and moms are supposed to do that, right? And that is that doesn't stop when they grow up.
Right.
So especially with in-laws coming in, right? They may have a different framework for what family looks like or is supposed to be, what family values are in terms of, loyalty or showing up or, what is it? So, for example, recently I had a scenario where had a sisters who were not getting along, and it's because they had a different set of expectations of what it meant to be present during a crisis. And for one sister, the expectation was that you would just show up and be present, be physically present during the crisis. For the other sister, it was you will handle the problem, right? And so this one was looking for comfort, this one was looking for results. Now, neither one was bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because they had these different sets of expectations of what it means to be available for somebody in a time of crisis, they missed each other. They missed the communication. They missed the intention. They were both trying to be there for each other, and they just shot past, And so if you can actually sit and when it caused conflict. Now, the reason that they were able to resolve it is because they addressed the conflict. And they said, okay, we're going to sit here and we're going to try to figure this out, right? Now, that's why they had to come to me, because they couldn't figure it out on their own, which is fine. But that's where we said, okay, look, your expectations are this of results, right? And so you handled this thing, but you weren't on site. So from your mind, you're like, check, I just loved my sister by going and handling the stuff. And this one over here is like, where is she? Oh my gosh, I'm like stewing in my own distress. Doesn't she love me? And so if you can start and map through, okay, what are those operational responsibilities? If you're a manager, what are your roles and responsibilities for, regular orders of business, for routine, for closing up, for handling the cash drawer, for what, or do you have P&L responsibilities? What staffing? What are your operational things? Map those out, like write them, documentation, okay, and then agree on them. And then from a family perspective of, hey, how do we want to experience each other? What do I, maybe as an extrovert, need from my family? And what do you as an introvert need from us, right? And how do we kind of create a framework where we can understand how to relate and operate together more effectively and more lovingly with more compassion? So a lot of times the parents don't want to create sibling conflict, or maybe sibling conflict has become a thing, right? And you've got some siblings who are operating in the business and some who are not, some who would like to be but can't because one sibling's already there and they don't want to cause the issues and the things. Most of the time, people are just afraid to repeat and relive dynamics that have not worked, and or to rehearse old narratives that everybody has outgrown and or would like to outgrow. So if you find yourself getting stuck, right, or you're avoiding because you know that it's just going to be the same song, same verse, just know that this is a time to dig in and to say, okay, what are the narratives that I'm afraid of? And what have we tried? And why is this bottlenecked? Why is this stuck? Well, it's stuck because so-and-so just doesn't know how to keep a lid on it, and da-da-da-da. Okay. So maybe that's true. How do we accept people for exactly how they are, without judgment, without punishment, and yet communicate to them the expectations and what your own needs are. Hey, when you lash out in this way, I know you see it as just blowing off steam, but it's almost like standing over a pressure cooker, like it's blinding me. It hurts. You're blowing off steam hurts me. And I would love to figure out a way for you to feel heard without me getting injured in the process. And to show that you love and you care, you're trying to connect, and that you would like to change the dynamic. You would like to change the thing, and without blaming that person. Now, sometimes not everybody is willing. All of that is very doable, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes some brain retraining, and sometimes it takes adjusting your reflexes, right? And reflexes are there for a reason. So, it is not for the faint of heart, and sometimes people are not willing to do it, or they're not in a state of life where they're able to. Maybe they don't have the emotional bandwidth. Maybe they don't have the time. Maybe they're like too focused on other things. That's where, if you are in a business and you have, this happens a lot, you've got like, look, I would love to sit here and hold space for your feelings all day long, but I can't because I've got a meeting to go to, I've got sales to do, I've got this, that, and the other, we've got like taxes due at the end of the month. Map out your practical stuff first on a sheet of paper. Map out your operating things that you need to get done. Then map out the feelings on top of that. When you can take that to your sibling, right, or you can take it to your kids who are not getting along and saying, okay, these are the things I have to do and I have to focus on. And I feel sad that you two are fighting. I feel helpless and conflicted. I feel stressed. I feel confused. I want to help, but I don't know how. Sometimes I feel hopeless. I'm going to focus on this part. I'm going to cut the top part off, the emotions, and I'm going to hand it to you. Right? And I want you, other person, to sit with this and understand this is what's happening inside of me, and I don't have time to go over it right now, but I love you and I want to get to it later. Let's make a time to actually talk through some of this stuff. And then stick that on the fridge if it's, or as I say, in the workroom if it's just y'all's family, but maybe not in front of everybody else, but, or stick it somewhere, that you'll come back to that, right? This is an IOU for emotional labor, right? That is just as important as the other operating pieces, right? But what it does say is, I've got stuff to do. It's not that you're not important. It's just that I'm trying to sequence and prioritize according to senses of urgency. And I'm going to have faith that you love me enough to handle this with me later, or to wait, or I see that you are upset, frustrated, whatever, right? I want to work on that. Sometimes it might actually be tied to the operations. So for example, brothers over logistics and sisters over sales. A sister is like, I can't do my job. My team can't do their job unless you are actually doing the delivery and the fulfillment. And so I'm feeling, again, really frustrated and upset and betrayed and like you're not taking me seriously, etc. Write that stuff up on that top line. And then on the bottom, things say, I need orders to be fulfilled promptly. I need them to be on time. I need to know if there's a hitch. I need this, that, and the other. I need explicit results of concrete things that you're asking for. Separate those two things out. Hand it off.
Yep. Yeah. That is what a great exercise. I mean, I think that is so smart to do that, because I think that especially if this is somebody that you're working with, obviously, and sharing Thanksgiving with, presumably, you have to be able to compartmentalize. All right, it's 11 a.m. I got some stuff I need to get done right now. You're my sister, you're my brother. My feelings are hurt for this reason, so we need to do this. We need to do this because it's affecting our work and it's affecting our relationship. So
right.
Yeah, so we need to get on the same page, and you need to understand that, in this example you just gave, that, our team is busting our hump trying to make sales, which is not an easy thing. You and I, Savannah, both know that. But if the fulfillment side is not there on the back end, then those sales end up just, dissolving away, and those customers go elsewhere. So what a great exercise for doing that. And I think also, with siblings, certainly, and I think there's maybe even a little bit more emotion there sometimes, maybe less so with cousins, maybe not. I mean, it just kind of depends on the dynamic. But I feel like, especially with those siblings, there's so much, because you share the same parents, right? So there's just so much more likelihood that emotional stuff is going to be harder to detach from.
Totally.
So,
Totally. And some of it's just super ingrained. I mean, just competition. I have twin 5-year-olds living with me right now, and they are, it's a boy and a girl, and they are both wired very differently. But, one of them is super competitive and is honestly a sore loser. And we have to work on that, right? And the other one just couldn't give two flips.
Yeah.
And so some of it is, again, there's that personality, but also, I have to be very cognizant operationally of when they're fighting for the front seat or whatever, well, not the front seat, but whatever the thing is. How do I make sure that I am not creating toxic competition, right? How am I not setting them up or playing off their personality differences in a way that's maybe convenient in the moment for getting something done, but long term is actually counterproductive for character building, right?
Yeah.
And so, and we don't, look, there's grace, right? Especially as parents, we don't get it right. And the first time or many, many, many times, and sometimes we don't learn things until we're in our 50s or 60s or what, and they're like, wow, I really wish I had known this when I was raising my kids. So just have some grace. And kids and people are resilient. And that's true, even when they're older, right? And just like you can learn new things and you can try new stuff. It just takes practice and time and intentionality and effort and grace and sometimes failing and trying again. It's not rocket science. It is hard. But it's also doable. So your kids, even if you grew up and you were like, look, I set a bad dynamic. I like to pit my kids against each other because I thought that it would inspire ownership and competition. And now I see that what it really did was it pulled them apart, and it created enemies where they could have been friends. And that makes me really sad, and I want to change that. You as a parent leading the way in that and acknowledging or saying like, hey, I see that this is a dynamic. I don't know how I contributed to it, but I would like to understand. That in and of itself changes the structure. It changes the whole relationship pattern. Because then all of a sudden your kids are like, wait, what? Hold on, huh? And now they have something to work with. They have an extra piece of conversation. It's completely novel to start thinking about, what is this paradigm that we're currently living in? And do we like it? Do we want to do something different? And okay, well, this is you, but this is you, but this is you, but this is you. And where mom and dad can say, hey, again, I love you and let's resolve this. What can I do? What did I do? Right? And starting to foster that attitude of understanding, compassion, and a desire to change. It goes so far. So far. Your attitude is still contagious. Still contagious.
Which that was the first point that you made when we opened this up. So as people are getting ready for Thanksgiving, approaching this with, what did you say, a spirit of comedy rather than conflict?
Criticism. Yeah, comedy rather than criticism. Yeah. Yes.
No, that's the perfect pin to put in this. We've just got a couple minutes left. Savannah, can obviously they'll be able to find you on LinkedIn, but how can the rest of folks find you if they want to learn more and they want to continue to learn from you? And I know you've got some great stuff you've got as far as marketing and LinkedIn lives and webinars coming up. So key the audience in on how to find you.
You can find me so my website is schemaconsult.com, and I'm posting events and things there. I'm starting a
YouTube. Spell that out.
CHEMA consult, like consultation. So if you can't see it, let's see, we'll get this. So it's mirrored. Oh well. CHEMA, schema. A schema is Greek for form or figure. It is in psychotherapy. It's your internal working model. It's your framework and your construct of the world, right? How you architect your expectations. And so schemaconsult.com. Look me up there. I also have events on Eventbrite and LinkedIn, and I'm starting a YouTube channel later this month. So
very cool. Excellent. Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much, Savannah, for coming on today. Really appreciate this. I think you were nervous about doing some monologues, but it was absolutely perfect. I love the analogies you weaved in there. And again, thank you so much. Appreciate you. And you have a happy Thanksgiving.
You have a happy Thanksgiving, Chris. This has been awesome. This has been so much fun. It's always such a delight hanging out with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet.
All right.